Good morning, everyone. I will be presenting this morning third-party contracts and exemptions. Okay, our session rules this morning are that the audio will only be available for the instructor, and that anytime you have any questions, you can enter those questions in the text chat window. And you can also enter comments that you may have if you're having trouble hearing my voice, or if the audio is breaking up. You can also enter comments such as that in the text chat window. Our topics for discussion this morning are going to be: what are third-party contracts, third-party contract setup, you're applying third-party contracts to a bill, the accounts, your student account and your third-party account, billing, and then I'll also provide some helpful hints, and we'll have the opportunity for some questions. For those of you who have already received the copy of this presentation, there have been a couple of additions that we'll be sending out after this session is over. But we'll also discuss exemptions and what they are, how to set up your exemptions, applying your exemptions to a bill, what the student account will look like, and then some helpful hints. And then there will also be time for questions at the end of that section. So we're going to go ahead and get started with third-party contracts. The third-party contracts provide the ability for the institution to pay outstanding charges for qualified students during a specific term and invoice that third party for those qualified charges that were incurred. Generally speaking, you would have some sort of contractual agreement with your third party. Okay, during the setup for your third-party contracts, you are required to build 2 detail codes at the very least, and that is in your detail code control form, ZSA DETC. The first of the detail codes is a payment type with a category code of CNT. And then you would also build a charge type detail code with a category of CNT. Now, you may choose to have detail codes that are specific to each of your contracts, but please keep in mind when you do that you need both a charge type and a payment type detail code for each one of those. In the example that I'm going to be providing today, I have used 2 very basic detail codes for your payment and your contract. Okay, this is just an example of the detail codes, and I've used what SunGard delivers as part of their seed data, which is TPCH, which is your contract charge, and then TPPY, which is your contract payment. If you'll notice, your charge is a charge type with a category of CNT, and then I've set the priority at 999. We also have the payment type detail code with a priority set at all zeros. Additionally, you're going to have to set up an ID for each one of your third-party contracts. And this is done in the person identification form, SPA-IDEN. And you're going to create the third-party contract as a non-person. We strongly encourage that you create your ID numbers that are specific to the company or that are easily identified when searching out your companies that are actually your third parties. You also need to enter a billing and or a mailing address for each one of your third parties. In this screenshot, I've indicated that we've used the ID number with the first three letters starting all fives, and this being my first contract, the last number is the number 1. This is for Sandy Beach Consulting, and I have entered the information as a non-person. Also indicated here is the billing address for my company. If you'll notice, my address type is BI for billing in this particular environment, and my sequence is 1. Okay, also for setting up your third-party contracts, you have to build your rules in your contract authorization form, which is TSA CONT. You have your base contract information, and this is where you're going to enter your description of what the contract will actually pay, whether that would be tuition and fees, books only, that type of information. Then you're also going to associate your contract payment and charge type detail codes with your actual contract description. Excuse me. You're also going to enter your expiration rules. You have the ability to enter an expiration term for the contract, which is not a required field. You can also select to roll contract information only or student information only that is related to this particular contract. Okay, your contract authorization allows you to build different levels of authorization. You have your account level authorization, which allows you to enter the percent, a minimum amount, a maximum amount, and a source of the transactions that will be paid, as well as your priority. There's also a category code level authorization, and this is going to allow you to enter approved category codes that can be paid, your priority, a minimum amount, a maximum amount, and the source of the transactions that can be paid. You also have your detail code level authorizations, and that is where you enter your authorized detail codes, the priority, your minimum amount, maximum amount, and the source of the transactions that will be paid. And then you also have your person assignment, which is where you will enter your ID numbers for your students that are approved by the actual third-party servicer. For the example, in the next few screenshots, I have actually used the detail code level authorization. Okay, for my contract, my Sandy Beach Consulting, this is contract number 1, and I can have multiple contracts related to one ID. And in this one, they're going to pay for tuition and fees, and I've associated my payment and my charge type detail code. This particular contract is active or effective for your term fall 2009, and I've set it to expire spring 2010. But I've also allowed for my contract to roll as well as my students. Okay, if I were going to set up the account level authorization, this is what the screen would look like for that type of authorization. I would enter a percent, a minimum amount, a maximum amount, and a source. This is more of a blanket type authorization where I can just enter a percent and then whatever amount I want to allow that contract to pay. Your source is going to be your main controlling factor, where it may be R for registration, which is generally what you're going to set for your tuition and fee type contracts. Since a student can have multiple contracts, then you would set the priority for which if this contract is going to pay first or if there would be something else that may pay on down the line, like first, second, or third. Okay, this is a screen capture of the category code level authorization. This you would enter your category code, such as TUI for tuition or FEE for fees. You would enter your priority and your percent, and then, of course, a minimum and a maximum amount. Currently, the way that this is set up is the source indicator is A for all sources, but you could also limit your source to, say, R for your registration activity. Okay, this is the detail code level authorization, and this is where I have actually set up for this particular contract. I'm going to allow this contract, or this contract is actually authorized to pay tuition as well as an athletic health or parking fee for the student. My minimum amounts are 0, and the first thing that I want it to pay is for my tuition up to an amount of $1,500. Then my athletic fee is up to an amount of $100. My health fee is an amount up to $75, and then my parking fee up to $50. I'm allowing for any source that the charges may be entered on the account to be paid. Okay, here I have my students that are assigned to my contract. If you'll notice here, I have the student ID and then, of course, the name information defaults. The role indicator is going to, I can allow for this student to roll or not. So with this indicator, I can mark a student to roll to the next term or not. I may also set my expiration term for individual students. And then, of course, I have the priority for this particular contract set for each one of these students at 1. And then, of course, my activity date. Okay, to get my third-party contract to apply to my student bill, I have to actually execute the student billing process, TSRC bill. And this process is executed from job submission, and you have to execute the process in apply credits mode. So in the run mode parameter setting, you would type in APPLYCRED. And what this does is it applies your third-party contract payments to your student account, and then it generates a charge for the balance on the third-party account. This is a copy of the actual list file where I have executed TSRC bill in apply credits mode. And if you'll notice, I have circled here the total of the people having credits calculated is set at 4 for these records. So I have 4 individuals that have been processed with a contract or an exemption. Okay, the student account is going to indicate a third-party contract payment type detail code on the account. And it will be entered for the detail code will have the approved amount associated with it. So when you execute the application of payments process, that third-party payment is going to apply to any outstanding charges that is approved by the contract. Your student receivable is actually going to be reduced, and then your student is going to be responsible for any balance that may be remaining that is over and beyond what the contract may allow. Okay, this is an example of what the student account will look like. In this case, Julia has a charge for $2,908 for her tuition amount of I believe that's $28. And if you'll notice, there's a contract payment here for the exact same amount for that term that will pay the charges for the tuition. So if all that happens to the student account, what's going to happen to the third-party account? Your third-party contract charge type detail code is actually going to be entered on your third-party account. A receivable is created for that third party, and then the balance due for that third-party contract is increased and also requires for you to do some billing with that third party. This is an example of what the third-party account will actually look like. So we have Sandy Beach Consulting, and they have paid $628 in charges for term 2009-08. And there is an outstanding balance due for that amount. Okay, so somehow you're going to have to get payment from your third-party contract. You can generate invoices through the TSR CBIL process for your third-party contracts. However, there is, in large part, most of your third parties are going to require an invoice that you cannot produce in Banner. I know from my past experience on campus, I tried everything under the sun to get them to use the invoice that was created from Banner, and I never got lucky. I always had to use some other source to actually generate an invoice. In many cases, such as vocational rehab, I'm not sure how they do it now, but at the time they still had a manual invoice that had to be typed through a typewriter at the time because it actually still had carbon paper between the pages. So depending on who your actual third-party contract is with will depend on what your billing requirements are. Just know that you do have the ability to generate an invoice out of Banner. However, most of the third parties do not find that as acceptable. Okay, just some helpful hints on your contracts. You can actually copy your contracts and or your students from one term to another, which does help, especially if you have a contractual agreement with a third party that lasts or extends for a full year. Then your contracts may also be expired, and you can do that based on your expiration term. Your students, you can delete students from a contract, and you can do this by entering a D in the delete field in the person authorization section of the form. Additionally, contracts are not refundable, so you would not want to be able to, if a refund was generated on a student account, you would not want to give the student a refund for their contract type payment. Are there any questions related to third-party contracts? I'll give you a couple of minutes to enter anything that you would like to ask or a comment that you may like to make in the text chat window. Okay, we have a question about when you run the TSRC bill, does it capture the 30-60 day? To have TSRC bill start the aging process, you have to execute the process in statement mode. And yes, it should begin the aging process for your third-party contracts if you execute the process in statement mode. Invoicing and apply credits mode will not actually start the aging process. Okay. Pat has asked a question. Do we have to implement this fall? I'm not sure that I understand your question thoroughly. To start using, you can begin using third-party contracts at any point in time as long as you have a contractual agreement with the third party that you're going to set up. So you could actually, if you're doing third party, but you're actually doing it outside of Banner, if you wanted to, you could run a test, say for a couple of those contracts or your test environment, and then just slide that over into production to start using it. And it actually works very well. Okay, Brenda has asked the question, does anyone have a simple process for invoicing the Georgia National Guard and the Army Reserves? I can speak to that to some extent, and I did not find an easy way. I'll be honest with you, Brenda, whenever I was on campus, we had a military installation, and it was not an easy process to invoice them. They required so many copies of their own documentation, and then they also required specific invoices, and it had to be in a certain format. So I would be interested to hear if someone has come up with an easy way to do that as well. Okay, Frida has asked a question. For the application of payment process to work, is there a form to accept payment for the third party because the payment and the charge don't tie together? One of the reasons that I actually prefer, and the example that I used was with the detail code level authorization, is that I wanted to ensure exactly what my contract was allowed to pay. And that gives a little bit more control as far as your payment of your contract paying for specific charges. I'm not sure how you actually set up your third-party contracts, but we can certainly discuss your setup and see if there is something that we can do to improve that process for you. Application of payment, though, should work to allow your third-party contract to pay whatever outstanding charges you have approved that is directly related with the contract. Brenda, Barbara Stewart has offered for you to call her, and you can find the number in the text chat window. Are there any more additional questions, or do I need to clarify anything before we move on to exemptions? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start with the exemptions. Please feel free to continue to ask questions in the text chat window if you would like. This part of the presentation is the part that has been added since the presentations for today's training have been sent out. We'll make sure that you get a new copy of this particular presentation since I've made some additions to it, and I do apologize for the final tweaking. Okay, your exemptions. They provide you with the ability to waive tuition and fee charges for qualified students during a specific term. And this is generally your approved waivers. And rather than, I will use intermittently exemptions and waivers. So you have to understand that when I say exemptions, I'm generally speaking waivers unless I clarify otherwise. Okay, to set up your exemptions, you have to create a payment type detail code. And this detail code has a category of EXM for exemptions. And this is actually built in your detail code control form, ZSA-DETC. Now, I do strongly encourage you, since your exemption type payments have to be a contra revenue account, that you would actually create, very likely, detail codes for each type of exemption that you have. Okay, this is an example detail code, and this one happens to be for an exchange student exemption, and it is a payment type detail code with a category of EXM. If you'll notice, our priority is set to $9.90, and that is because it will pay for specific charges that have a priority right now, $9.90 or above. Your exemptions work very much like your contracts do, in that you have an exemption authorization form, which is TSA EXPT. You also have base rules. You can roll your exemptions, and then you also have the various level authorizations to assign your exemption payments. Your exemption base information requires a description for the exemption or the waiver that you're entering. It also requires that you associate the payment type detail code that you built in the detail code control form. Now, you can create your exemption roll options where you can expire your exemption, and then you also have the option to roll your exemption and or roll the students that are associated with that particular exemption. Okay. You also have the various levels of authorization. You have your account level authorization, which is very similar to your third-party level account level authorizations, in that you have your percent, your minimum amount, your maximum amount, and then the source of the transaction that will be paid, and then the priority of that particular level authorization. Then you also have your category code, which is your approved category codes, priority, your minimum amount, maximum amount, and then the source of that transaction that will be paid. Okay, you also have your detail code level authorizations, and this is going to include your authorized detail codes, your priority, your minimum amount, your maximum amount, and then the source of the transactions that will be paid. Your person assignment section is where you're actually going to enter your ID number for your students, and I apologize, this should say exemptions. So you're going to enter the ID number of your students that are approved for your actual waivers or exemptions. Okay, your exemption authorization, TSA EXPT, and this is how it looks. Now, your exemption codes are a little bit different in that you don't actually have to create an ID number to associate with each one of your exemptions. You have an exemption code, and it is a number selected by you. In this case, we have it's 0004, and it's for term, in this particular case, 2002-02. All right, the description of this one is an exchange student exemption, and we have the detail code of EXCH, which was in the example screenshot from your detail code control form. For our exemption roll options, we have an expiration term of 2006-02, and then we have selected that we will actually roll our exemptions but not roll our students. And in a lot of cases, let me just go ahead and tell you, while you have the option to roll your students with your exemptions, because you should be verifying that students are approved for an exemption each term, or approved for a waiver each term, you probably should not actually roll your students. However, please feel free to roll your exemptions. Okay, again, this is the account level authorization, and this is just a screenshot to show you exactly what would appear on the screen if you chose to enter your account level authorizations for this particular exemption. The driving force for this particular level of authorization would be your source code. Okay, your category code level authorization, your driving force for entry or for approval will be your category code. In many cases, waivers are for tuition, fees, maybe even out-of-state tuition, and you could enter your category code for those particular detail codes. Please know, though, that if you enter like TUI for tuition, any item that falls under that category code could potentially be paid by this third-party contract. I'm sorry, by this exemption. Getting myself confused. Okay, in this case, for the detail code level authorization, I have the detail codes for out-of-state tuition listed. It will pay up to a maximum amount in one case of $3,798, and in the other case, $1,264. If you'll notice, the source that we have listed here is to include only the source of R, which is a registration type source. So the student will have to have one of these types of detail codes, and it will have to come from the registration system for the exemption to pay. All right, listed here are the students that I actually have associated with my exemption. If you'll notice, none of these students are indicated to actually roll with the exemption, and I have not indicated an expiration term, meaning that even if I actually roll this exemption, the students aren't going to go with the information. I would have to go in and do a manual entry for each student that is approved. Okay, again, the student billing process, TSRC bill, is how you're actually going to apply your exemptions to your student bill. So you're going to execute that process from job submission in apply credits mode. Now, if you're using exemptions in third-party contracts, you don't have to execute this process separately to have your exemptions and your third-party contracts applied to the student account. When you run the process in apply credit mode, it is actually going to process both exemptions and third-party contracts at the same time. Again, just to illustrate what the list file will look like, it will provide you with a number of students or people that have credits that are actually calculated. And in this case, there were 4 of those that either have exemptions or contract type payments. Okay, your student account is going to receive an exemption payment type detail code that is going to be listed with the approved amount that is going to be paid or that is paid to the student. When the application of payment process is executed, the exemption payment is going to apply to the outstanding charge that it was approved to pay. Your student receivable is going to be reduced by that amount, and then your student is going to be responsible for any remaining balance. This is an example of what the student account would look like. If you notice here, the student has received charges for out-of-state tuition in the amount of $954 and $312, and they have received an exemption type payment for $954 and $312. Okay, some helpful hints on your exemptions. Again, you can copy your exemptions and or the students that are associated from one term to another. Again, I want to caution you on copying your students over, but please feel free to do your exemptions. Your exemptions may be expired, and they can be expired based on a term that you enter. And then your students, you can also have the ability to delete a student from an exemption. This is done very much the same way that your contracts are done, and that is by entering a D in the delete field in the person authorization section. Again, your exemptions are not refundable. You do not want to be giving your student a reimbursement check for an exemption type payment that has been made on the student account. Okay, are there any questions related to exemptions? While you're giving some thought to your questions related to exemptions or even some additional questions that may have come up related to your third-party contracts, I'm going to put up a participant poll. We actually want to know that you participated in this session with us, so let me put that up. Please enter your name and anybody that is sitting in the room with you participating in this session, as well as your institution name so that we know who you are. I would also like to tell you while you're completing filling out this particular participant poll that we also have a training session that is scheduled for 11 o'clock, which will be self-service financial aid. And then we also have another session for the student area this afternoon at 2 o'clock that will be for registration set up, prerequisite checking for those of you who may be interested in participating. Okay, I also wanted to provide you with our resources that are available to us. Naturally, if you have a production down situation or you have a question or an issue that you need our assistance with, please feel free to contact our OIT help desk. Listed on this slide are a number of ways to contact them, and we will provide you with any assistance possible. I'm also going to put a survey up because I would like to hear your comments about this session. Again, we will be sending out the complete slides that were presented on this morning, and I do appreciate you taking this opportunity to participate in the session with me. It is always good to see everyone participate. So if you would, complete the survey, and remember that we have another session that will be starting at 11 o'clock. I will be around for approximately 10 more minutes to answer any questions that you may have that come up. Now I'm going to put up the survey. Thank you.